You're very, very welcome along this evening. I'm going to just give you a quick run through of how we're going to proceed over the next hour. So I'm going to give you a small bit of background about the Review of Irish Studies in Europe, or RISE journal, and some thanks to the people who make this journal possible. I'll be then introducing the editors of this current issue, 7.2. And unfortunately, one of the editors, Professor Carolyn Lusin, is unwell and is unable to be with us tonight. And I know we all send her our best wishes for a speedy recovery, but I'm delighted that her co-editor, Professor Ralf Haekel, is here with us, and I'll be introducing Ralf shortly, who will then introduce the issue and some of the contributors to speak about their articles within the issue. And we'll have short presentations on some of those articles from some contributors to the issue, and then we'll be opening out for some questions in the latter, say, 15, 20 minutes of the session. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of info, and hopefully, I imagine many of you may already be familiar with Review of Irish Studies in Europe Journal. It's the official journal of EFACIS, or the European Federation of Associations and Centres of Irish Studies. I'm delighted that our president, Professor Katharina Renhack, is here with us today, present in this session, though traveling by train. So unfortunately, she's not in a position where she can contribute, but she is listening and, of course, supporting this publication and this issue and this launch. So Rise as a journal began in 2016. We emerged, as I said, from Ephesus. Ephesus is a federation that has centres from Ireland all the way across to Finland and across Europe, and from Norway down to Spain and Greece and Italy. So we've a lot, I think, over 50 centres across Europe, and various national associations as well. And it was out of a kind of I guess, a need that was identified by these centres and by researchers in broad area of Irish studies in Europe, for a dedicated interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary journal that could address Irish studies in the broadest sense. So we welcome articles, we welcome submissions, we welcome uh, applications and proposals for themed issues across the broad range of areas. I suppose humanities, social science focused, what we would have, and we've had articles that have looked at literature, have looked at visual arts, have looked at music, have looked at history, politics, and a whole range of related areas in Irish studies. So we welcome and encourage that discourse, and we provide a forum in which that debate, that conversation, that research sharing can happen. So, if you'd like to submit an article, or if you'd like to submit a themed issue, you can email myself at rise, at Ephesus, EFACIS.eu. You'll find that on our website, which is risejournal.eu. And we also have a dedicated review section, including in this new issue, which is curated by our reviews editor, Professor Sylvie Mikowski, who I'm delighted is with us here, and is also a contributor, by the way, to this issue as well. And if you have a review, or if you have a suggestion for a review, if you're a publisher, or if you want your publisher to contact us, you should email Sylvie at risereviews@ephesus.eu. And just one other note, before I introduce our editors tonight and the issue, um, just to say thanks to all the people, including Sylvie, of course, as a reviews editor, but also to those contributors to our editorial board, which include Dr. Joos Augustine at Leiden University in Netherlands, to Professor Elke Docker at Leuven, University of Leuven in Belgium, to Professor Katharina Renhack, who've mentioned already, our president and also editorial board, and Dr. Daniela Tianova from Charles University in Prague, who I'm delighted is here with us today, as well as an attendee in this session. Um, so I want to thank in particular our assistant editor, Seán Del Torres, who's here and who's kind of managing this session as well tonight. So Seán is really central to the production, and anyone who's been involved with EFACIS, not just in terms of Rise, but across the many initiatives that EFACIS now supports, roundtables. There's translation projects. There is also projects with bringing itinerary with writers and performers, and Seán has been a critical support and resource in terms of making all of those things happen. And particularly from my perspective as editor of Rise, in terms of supporting and facilitating the publication of our issues. So I'm sincerely grateful to Seán for all her work in terms of making Rise the journal happen and keeping it going into the future. So it's now my happy pleasure to introduce well, at least one of the editors of this wonderful new issue, which we're very, very proud to include. And I think it's perhaps our 14th or 15th issue. So we've usually published 2 issues a year since we were founded in 2016 as a journal. And this issue is one that brings a focus on, as the title says, new voices and new directions in 21st century Irish writing, and brings some really fascinating perspectives to bear on recent contributors to the area of Irish writing. I'm going to introduce now Professor Ralf Haekel, who will give you a little bit more information about the issue and introduce some of the contributors to the issue. So just to give you a little bit, those who may not be familiar with Ralf. Ralf is Professor and Chair of English Literature at Leipzig University in Germany. His main research interests are in the fields of Romantic Studies, early modern drama and theatre, Irish Studies and media theory. He received his PhD from FU Berlin in 2003, and in 2013 his Habilitation from the University of Göttingen. He's currently acting president of the German Society for English Romanticism. He's author of The Soul in British Romanticism for 2014, editor of the Handbook of British Romanticism, published in 2017, and most recently co-editor of Media Ecologies of Literature in 2023. And I'm really grateful to Ralf and to Carol and to all the contributors for the extraordinary work they did in bringing this wonderful issue together.
Thanks, Seán, for these very, very kind words of introduction. And before I switch my program here so that I have my notes in front of you, I will not be able to see you then for a minute or two. I'd like to extend my thanks to Seán and Seán, because their assistance in the past months was so amazing. It was really, really great to always be able to contact you, to always have support, to always be sure that we could count on your understanding when we were running a bit late in summer. And I also send my regards. I also send Caroline's regards. I spoke to her earlier. She is too unwell to attend today, and she sends her regards. She's absolutely sad not to be able to be here and to contribute here, but she was a vital power in the editing process. So she's very sad that she cannot be here. But again, thanks to Seán and Seán, because especially in the past few weeks and months, this was an amazing, I don't know how I should call that. It's always good to know that you can fall back on someone, and that there will be actually very competent support in all manners and cases. So thanks a lot for this. So I will switch and talk about this project. The special issue of the Review of Irish Studies in Europe is entitled New Voices and New Directions in 21st Century Irish Literature. It is based on a conference that Caroline and myself organized at Leipzig University in September 2022, so just over 2 years ago. There are 2 aspects that this project and this special issue seek to address. The first is a very general notion regarding contemporary literature written in English. In literary studies, scholars tend to categorize literature according to more or less broad historical periods, such as Romantic, Victorian, modernist, or postmodernist literature. Although this is or seems to be a truism, it is in no way self-evident, as scholarship has only begun to think of literature in historicist terms in the early 19th century. It is a peculiar fact now that there is no unifying concept for literature written after postmodernism. For lack of a better word, contemporary literature is still called contemporary literature. Concepts like metamodernism, postmodernism, or lesser known terms like digimodernism or cosmodernism never really caught on. This led to the following situation. The field of contemporary literature written in English is vibrant and exciting, but there is no such thing as a dominant fashion or paradigm. Once we close in on Ireland, the situation is slightly different, of course, because there are indeed important landmarks used to categorize phases of Irish literature. Now, since the 1990s, there have been massive changes. The Good Friday Agreement, Easter 1998, created peace in the north. The Celtic Tiger brought a previously unknown extent of prosperity to the south until the 2008 crash reinvoked the ghosts from the past. Furthermore, since the 1990s, immigration and diversity in ethnic and religious matters have become a social and political fact. Hence, while the aforementioned terminology of postmodern, post-postmodern, or metamodern is by no means irrelevant to Irish studies, the field of contemporary literature tends to be categorized according to economic categories, such as Celtic Tiger or post-Celtic Tiger literature instead. At the same time, because of the impact of the abuse scandal, the Catholic Church lost its dominant position within society. The extent of this general transition may best be seen in the outcome of two decisive referendums. First, the 2015 referendum, which decided in favor of equal marriage, and the 2018 referendum in which the repeal of the Eighth Amendment was voted for, and abortions were no longer illegal. All of this is an expression of a very open, inclusive, and diverse society that is much more progressive than, for instance, post-Brexit England or the USA. And yet, literary overviews and handbooks still stress the more or less conservative nature of contemporary Irish literature. James Ward, for instance, writes in the Blackwell Companion to Contemporary British and Irish Literature that, quote, "Transformations in Irish life have heightened rather than reduced the significance of the past. However, and much contemporary writing serves to reflect on and reckon with recent history." End of quote. The present special issue wishes to challenge this notion of Irish literature as predominantly concerned with the political past and predominantly written in the realist mode. In the 21st century, the national obsessiveness, which in Ireland has predominantly found expression in realist and naturalist modes of writing, as Ian Smith puts it, has indeed gradually made way for a new and decidedly more open and inclusive literary scene. Sylvie Mikowski, who will present her chapter later, focuses on a sense of place in a wide range of works by Sarah Baum, Claire Keegan, and many others that are decidedly non-anthropocentric. Rory Ellen looks at the impact of magical realism in the works of Jan Carson, while Kubra Izamis analyzes two novels by Michelle Gallen with a particular focus on the role of humor in fiction concerned with the Troubles. Franka Leitner takes a look at genre fiction, and in particular crime fiction and its treatment of the new Catholic upper class. Sina Schuhmaier investigates Black Irish writing in her paper on Melatu, Uche, Okorie. And there's also a marked return to experimental modes of expression. Caroline Steinke reads the experimental novel Solar Bones by Mark McCormack through the lens of the most recent developments in affect studies. And finally, the two chapters by David Nisters and Jessica Bundschuh, which they will introduce themselves in just a second, take a look at exciting developments in Irish poetry. So the overall attempt was to show that there is in no way just on realist writings, on a focus on political history, social history, but there is actually, just as in other fields of Anglophone literature, a widespread and experimental scene that actually is explored by many, many writers in many different voices. And therefore, we chose this title, New Voices, New Directions, in order to show that diversity is much more important and dominant than a paradigm or a fashion that is actually dominant right now. And I'm very, very happy that 3 of the contributors will present their findings. And Sylvie Mikowski was our keynote speaker, and therefore I'm particularly happy that she will be the first to present her findings, and she looks in her essay on a broad range of marvelous Irish works, especially with a focus on sense of place. So I hand it over to you, Sylvie.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, first of all, thank you very much to Ralf and Caroline, whom I haven't had the pleasure of meeting because unfortunately she was already ill on the day of the conference. I have very good memories of that time. And thank you, of course, to Seán and to Sina, who are terrific proofreaders. You can never beat them to the comma. So in my paper, I wish to investigate the relevance today of Heaney's famous sense of place, which he described and explained in an essay published in 1977, and in which he infused much of his early poetry. To the poet's mind, place is a defining factor of identity formation, insofar as the physical environment an artist is born into is transformed into what he calls the country of the mind. What's more, the nature of Irish history, with its narrative of dispossession and repossession of the land, and its emphasis on soil and territory, accounts for the specific relationship Irish writers have entertained with place. It also explains the specific relationship Heaney establishes between language and landscape in Ireland. But the notion of place has also been defined in various ways by humanist geographers such as Gillian Rose, Doreen Massey, Edward Ralf, or Yi-Fu Tuan. Ursula Heise, for her part, has advocated to enlarge the sense of place to embrace what she calls a sense of planet. Edward Ralf, for instance, has asserted that, quote, to be human is to live in a world that is filled with significant places. To be human is to have and to know your place. My point in this paper is to show that the sense of place has taken on many various meanings in contemporary fiction by Irish writers. For a whole range of contemporary novelists, for instance, the country of the mind has not been a source of wonder and comfort, but rather an oppressive space where the conservative forces of patriarchy, church, and state have combined to keep individuals stuck in the place allotted to them by birth. Place, in their case, is often synonymous with all the ills attached to close communities. The examples I examine in the chapter are Donald Ryan's The Spinning Heart, Paul Lynch's The Black Snow, and Claire Keegan's Small Things Like These. To these novels, I could actually have added more recent publications, such as Colin Toybin's Long Island, Colin Barrett's a collection of short stories, Homesickness, and Donald Ryan has just published a sequel to The Spinning Heart. Another response to the kind of sacralization of the sense of place achieved by Heaney when he argues that our sensing of place was once more or less sacred has been illustrated by novelists attesting to the evolution of today's Ireland towards a multicultural, globalized society. Once a society characterized by periods of mass emigration, Ireland has since the start of the 21st century welcomed immigrants from all parts of the world, complicating the narrative of a racially and culturally homogeneous, territory-bound national community. This new reality was taken into account in the examples I examine in the chapter of Una Frole's Flight and also Donald Ryan's Strange Flowers. What is more, the boom of the Irish economy has relied for some time now on the privileges granted to multinational companies, especially those involved in high-tech and social networks, upsetting Irish people's relationship to space and time, as was brilliantly explored by McCormack in Solar Bones. In the interconnected world of the novel, time and space have become compressed. The here and now get mixed up with the distant past. What happens at the other end of the world finds echoes in parts of rural Ireland, rural Mayo, in fact, and even life and death become interchangeable, as we find out that Marcus, the narrator, is actually already dead. The novel is full of echoes of the various crises which deeply transformed the Irish beliefs, culture, and customs that were alluded to by Heaney. Among these various crises, the bug in the water, which causes the narrator's wife's illness, puts to the fore the topic of the natural disasters which threaten our planet, deeply altering our sense of place, and especially the respective places of humans and non-humans in the world. To my mind, one of the most important shifts that have occurred in the Irish sense of place is the one recorded not just by McCormack in Solar Bones, but also by Claire Louise Bennett in Pond, and by Sarah Bohm in Spill Simmer with a Falter, in A Line Made by Walking, but mostly in her last book, Seven Steeples. Both Bohm and Bennett seem to have found inspiration in Henry Thoreau's Walden, which was the basis of several defining works of equal criticism, such as those by Lawrence Buell or by Jane Bennett. In Pond, in A Line Made by Walking, or in Seven Steeples, nothing happens to the protagonist who do nothing, except observe the tiniest details of their environment. Both Bennett and Bohm attempt to find new narrative ways of writing about placeness, which would take into account the necessity for humans to recognize that they are not superior to the non-human world that surrounds them, but a part of it. Hence the emphasis in Bohm and Bennett on animals, plants, things, and more generally on the materiality of the world. Thanks to those writers and others, such as Carrie Doherty, for instance, we are invited to think beyond the sense of place constructed by history and culture, and to open up our imagination to the sense of planet advocated by Ursula Heise. The other versions of placeness in contemporary Irish fiction that I deal with in the paper, that is the stifling Irish small town community or the globalized hyper-liberal society, are thus offered an alternative, which opens up new vistas to Heaney's traditional sense of place. Thank you for your attention.
Notice that I'm the chair. Thanks, Sylvie. Jessica, would you actually be the next presenter then?
Happily, thank you very much. And thanks for including, along with David, a few contributions about poetry. We're always glad to be part of the team. So I'm looking at a poet, and his name is Stephen Sexton, and his book cover actually says a lot, because we already see even this is the UK edition, and the American edition also does a similar thing of doubling, and that's one of the things that I'm thinking about in this particular. It's a long elegy, which is in couplets, and it's for Ciaran Carson, who had been his mentor. Now, actually, Stephen Sexton teaches at Queen's University, and at the time, Ciaran Carson had been the first director of the Seamus Heaney Center there. What we have in the case of Stephen Sexton is we have a poet who has come of age during the time of the decade, or as a poet, I should say, during the decade of the centenaries from 2012 to 2023. And one of the things that is very pronounced in Sexton's work is the sense of events happening twice, he says, but from two perspectives. And so first of all, the long poem is in couplets, but it is also a continual sense of doubling, of following his mentor, who is in his tweed and being the consummate Belfast flaneur, that he's following him across Belfast in this elegy, thinking about the various times that he had seen him last. So what my argument here is that Sexton revives the genre of the elegy. And one of the things that he's doing, particularly in an interesting way, is he's writing this elegy during the COVID pandemic. So we could see this as writing an elegy during a time of global grief is interesting. And particularly also here we have a poem that is very interested in time that's askew, as I said, time that's doubled. And we have in the time of the pandemic, a kind of sluggishness of time that's out of sync, and this atemporality that happens. And what makes Stephen Sexton's work so very fun, and his first volume, for instance, had a whole, it was entirely a long sequence about Mario Brothers. So, so a gaming, focus that he had there he is very ironic and very humorous, even in conditions like an elegy that could be quite bleak. And so one of the things that he does that I see as forward-looking is he's resisting the sluggishness of the pandemic, creating this opportunity to connect discrete temporalities and reconnect things that would be, between the living and the dead, by using humor and making things that are very unusual and sometimes startling synchronicities that can happen. And one of the things that he does, I had the good fortune of actually having been able to also interview Stephen for an EFACIS Irish Itinerary podcast. It was actually during the pandemic. And then later, I wanted to write about this particular poem, and I was able to go to Belfast and actually walk with Stephen through Belfast and have him show me all of the different, I mean, it was very, very helpful because it's a poem, coming right after Sylvie, that is so much about place and about walking through place and really knowing how one thing connects to another. And the whole poem is about motion. It begins with Stephen Sexton's speaker driving into Belfast, passing the crematorium where Carson had been interned, and he makes in terms of the humor, the sense of jokes through the idea of a metaphor. And in this the podcast that he and I did, he spoke a lot about metaphor, as he has in other interviews. And one of the things that he said in a recent interview with Micheál McCann is he said that this book is full of all kinds of vehicles. Things are always moving. And this is absolutely true, from cars to helicopters to barges to horses to walkers to even, in my opinion, most centrally interesting metaphor is the metaphor of the shipping container, because he reflects on this, on the Primark building that was burned down in the center of Belfast, and had left the air so blackened the last summer that Carson was alive, making it hard for him to breathe. And as someone who is suffering from lung cancer, it was quite, it was sort of materializing, as I said, the sense of fear that he talks about with regard to air that everyone felt during the pandemic. And one of the things, using a reference that Stan Smith spoke about with regard to Ciaran Carson as ambilocation, where you're not only in two places at once, but between places, always, displaced, misplaced, and en route. We see the sense of the joke of the metaphor that he brings in, and he even speaks about, sort of in a meta-poetic way, thinking back to I.A. Richards' idea of the vehicle and the tenor. So we have this constant motion of moving things from one side to the next. And he does this, just in conclusion, through these two various gods that he sees sort of rules the places in Belfast, the sunny god of Apollo and the kind of the cantankerous god of Mercury, and how they're working together. The poem spans through day and night, and ultimately ends with many, many references to Ciaran Carson's work. And so that was one of the things that I tried to do in the article, is not only have Stephen Sexton's poem in focus, obviously, but through all of his dog-legged, journeys into and references to Ciaran Carson, then I would invoke the lines to give a little bit more of a context of things that he was pulling from Carson's work into the picture. And he ends ultimately with a very famous passage of Ciaran Carson having a big breakfast full of all of, a full English breakfast, Ulster style, with everything all cooked up. And so it ends even in this bleak way, in this sort of very funny and lighthearted, recapturing of a moment when Ciaran Carson had been in the height of his prime. So thank you so much for including my contribution, and thanks to the editors of Rise and the editors, and then also to the special issue, the editors, to Ralf and Caroline. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica. And it's a special pleasure to have your paper as professor at Leipzig University, because Stephen gave a talk at Leipzig University last year. Not a talk, but he read from his poetry together with Seán and Jessica, and it was just lovely. And so let's move on and talk about another collection of poetry, and I hand it over to David.
Thank you, Ralf, for introducing me. Can you all hear me all right? Is that okay? Good. I wasn't sure whether I should prepare PowerPoint, so I thought I'd prepare a PowerPoint. Let's see if I can share it with you. It might be a tad too much, but anyway. So let's see. Go for this. Go for that. Okay. So it is my pleasure to share with you today a few ideas on the significance of the fox in Leanne O'Sullivan's A Quarter of an Hour, first published in 2018. The 36 poems that make up this collection conceptualize the sickness, coma, and eventual recovery of the author's husband, Andrew, as a journey through an inflamed world. In the context of this journey, the figure of the fox takes on a particularly prominent role. Thus, 3 individual poems are dedicated to Andrew's encounter with the animal. Further highlighting the fox's central importance to Andrew's journey from sickness to recovery, the collection is in addition prefaced by the following 4 lines. When I was a fox, I could see the fire spreading across the valley, and I set out to find him. What is more, however, and on account of the reproduction of a miniature that accompanies the description of the fox in the 13th century Rochester bestiary, now British Library MS Royal 12F13, which you can see right here, on the cover of A Quarter of an Hour, we are invited to read Andrew's fox in connection with the fox of the medieval bestiary. Indeed, with regard to conceptualizing Andrew's coma as a journey from sickness to recovery, such a reading makes sense for 2 related reasons. First, the fox of the medieval bestiary helps to represent Andrew's journey as a liminal experience. As Victor Turner states when commenting on the liminality of rite de passage in what he calls simpler societies, the structural invisibility of liminal personae has a 2-fold character. They are at once no longer classified and not yet classified. The neophytes are neither living nor dead from one aspect and both living and dead from another. Their condition is one of ambiguity and paradox, a confusion of all the customary categories. While being on his journey, Andrew is in a process that defies clear-cut definition, most crucially the binary opposition of dead and alive, since he is really in between these 2 states. Yet in-betweenness is also a mark of the fox of the medieval bestiary, who appears to be dead to lure in its prey, but comes back to life once its prey is close enough to be caught. which you can also see here. Accordingly, Isidore Seville gives the following account of the fox in Book 12 of his 7th century encyclopedic work, the Etymologies. Foxes, vulpes, are so named as if the word were volupes, for they are shifty on their feet, and never follow a straight path, but hurry along tortuous twistings. It is a deceitful animal, tricking others with its guile, for whenever it has no food, it pretends to be dead, and so it snatches and devours the birds that descend to its apparent corpse. Just like the birds in the bestiary, Andrew approaches the apparent corpse of a fox in the poem The Fox, which is the second piece of the collection. Upon returning home one evening, he sees the open-mouthed body of the fox lying on the road ahead of us. The poem's speaker then goes on to say, "And before it all vanished into darkness, you had lifted her into your arms and gestured to me, and gently set her down like a small fire among the grasses. So soft, you said, she could almost pass through you in that light." The next morning, however, Andrew's fox, who, by the way, is consistently referred to as female in a quarter of an hour, is gone, marking the beginning of his journey through the coma. Similar to the fox of the medieval bestiary, therefore, Andrew's fox is dangerous. Yet, much in line with the portrayal of Andrew's journey as a liminal process, she is paradoxically also helpful. Indeed, having led Andrew into the coma, the fox plays the crucial role of guiding him on his way to recovery. In Fox, one of the last poems of the collection, Andrew meets a fox halfway along the way. "What is she doing?" he thought. "She said, 'I am waiting to see what you will do next.' That's funny," he said, beginning to follow. "I'm doing the very same thing." And that was the way they went, morning after morning, the hedgerows turning, their infinite colors, the body with its own fire. Here then is another reason for why the reference to the medieval bestiary tradition helps to conceptualize Andrew's journey from sickness to recovery as a liminal process. Andrew's fox is both dangerous and helpful, betwixt and between any clear-cut categorization. Furthermore, Andrew's recovery does not only involve his physical health, but also the retrieval of his memory. As a matter of fact, it is this mnemonic function that further specifies the close connection between Andrew's fox and the fox of the medieval bestiary. Thus, while the animal is commonly depicted as wicked, shifty, and deceitful, indeed as a symbol of the devil in the bestiary tradition, there is yet another more supportive side to it. Much in the way of Andrew's fox, the fox of the bestiary was seen as instrumental in supporting the faculty of memory, on account of the role of bestiaries in textual cultures of medieval schools. Mary Carruthers points out, what the bestiary taught most usefully in the long term of a medieval education was not natural history or moralized instruction, but mental imaging, the systematic forming of pictures that would stick in the memory. In this regard, then, the fox of the medieval bestiary is a useful representation of the liminal process of Andrew's journey on different levels, helping to conceptualize this process and incidentally substantiating an idea that was formulated by the 12th century scholar Alan of Lille in the first stanza of his poem Omnis Mundi Creatura, the Latin original of which you can see in front of you. The whole created world, like a book and a picture, serves us as a mirror of our life, fate, state, or death, a trustworthy seal. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks a lot, David. And yeah, wonderful to be able to have this roundtable and to really open up now. And yeah, I would invite you to have a joint discussion of the many facets of our collection, but our collection is less at the center of it than really the field of Irish literature that is actually really open and exciting right now. And if the contributors want to say a word or two about their papers, they are, of course, invited to do so as well in that context. So there are, of course, our presenters are here as well. So yeah, I'll open up the floor. not presenters, contributors. Presenters is 2 years ago. Yeah, Caroline Steinke is here as well, but she's sick. Therefore, she has no voice. Therefore, she will refrain from talking. But Franke and Sina may wish to say a word.
All right, Franke, would you like to start? I don't mind.
You can start.
Okay, I haven't prepared anything, obviously, and I'll keep it rather brief. So I looked at this Hostel Life, which is a short story collection by the Nigerian Irish writer Melatu Okorie, and it's also a very popular short story collection, which has been much discussed also in academic circles. So I wanted to look at this from two connected points of view. One linking with previous discussions of Okorie as being a writer who represents the system of direct provision in Ireland, and one through which I framed the paper being that I also wanted to engage critically with the narrative that Ireland has only become a multicultural society with the Celtic Tiger years in the 21st century, which also implies that everything before was very white and homogenous. And it can be a very easy way out. So first of all, I wanted to address that dominant narrative and then look at Okorie's writing as something that not only criticizes our society and the conditions in the asylum process, but also Irish literature and ideas about Irish literature, which are very often rooted in that dominant idea of Ireland and its history. So that was my take on it, and I think I'll leave it at that and hand over to Franke. But I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay. I also haven't prepared anything. I hope I can really summarize what I actually said. So my paper was focusing on two novels, two crime novels. Well, one is really a crime novel, the other one half and half, so to say. So it was Kevin Powers' Bad Day in Blackrock and then Tana French, The Secret Place. And what's interesting about these two novels is that they both take place in private boarding schools. And what I did was I kind of, in the first step, looked at what kind of new generation is portrayed in these two novels, and it's a very negative portrayal in both cases. Yeah, we are looking at a very privileged group of young people, and then in both cases we also have the death of a young man, and in both cases it's a murder case, and the young man in both cases has been murdered by people from the same generation. So this is very central. And then I also looked at the concept of melancholia and the conventions of the Irish genre of the big house novel. So first of all, melancholia, this kind of, there is a mourning, but it's not really conscious. And I connected this to the death of these two young men, but also to the end of the Celtic Tiger, because both novels are set around the time of the financial crisis, when the Celtic Tiger is coming to an end, where we also have this kind of unconscious mourning for what was imagined as a very prosperous future for Ireland, but then it did not come true. And this is what I connect to this feeling of melancholia. And then in both cases, I said the setting is this private, exclusive boarding school, and it's drawing on conventions of the big house novel, where we have this kind of emblem of power, but also always connected to death and decay. And this also comes across in the two novels, that we have I think I used a quote about the big house novel about this genre, and basically says glory days are over. And this is also very much the feeling that these two novels bring across. So the Celtic Tiger is over, and now glory days are over too. Even though glory days might have not been as glorious, because we also have this portrayal of this kind of, young generation gone wrong in a way. Yeah, I hope this made sense. might
Thank
have been
you.
a bit convoluted. I'm also happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. What fascinates me as an editor who has not contributed an individual paper, so I can ask questions too, and I find this very interesting, is that you have a very exciting situation of a coexistence. It's not a complete rejection of the big house novel or the realist mode, but it's a reconfiguration. And I must say that Sylvie's paper was an eye-opener to me, because you do have these novels that are concerned with the spinning heart, for instance, that are concerned with the passing on of violence, and you have the housing crisis, and you do have different perspectives, but then something else happens, something else changes it, but it does not completely, like in the historicist and non-historicist mode that I mentioned at the beginning, is it's part of my own research right now. Is the question, does in this day and age historicist thinking really still make sense? Because in Sylvie's paper, for instance, you have the overlap of different modes, and one does not necessarily contradict the other. Or if you just consider Franca's contribution right now, where you have actually different modes, the big house novel, you do have genre fiction, and at the same time, social commentary, and this contemporaneity, this being here at the same time, is a very exciting moment, I think. This is not a question to any of you, but maybe Sylvie, you want to say something about it.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, I know what you mean, because it's true that on the one hand, you can find the continuation of a certain tradition, like you were mentioning Donald Ryan and this type of writer. They do continue, this tradition of the small town narrative. It takes place in the countryside, and there are all kinds of problems happening, which you already find in McGann, in Edna O'Brien. It really goes back to that. And it's really surprising that Donald Ryan has just published the sequel to The Spinning Heart. It's called Heart Be at Peace. And it's the same characters again, and it's the same story again. And on the other hand, you find much more perhaps different themes, such as, again, as I was saying, and Sina seems to have taken up that topic as well of, you seem to challenge the idea that those people are new to Ireland, but I'm older than you, and I remember that when I was young and went to Ireland, everybody was white. I'm sorry, but I was perhaps the most exotic person in County Clare at the time. So yes, I think there was a change in that, and in that opening up to other cultures and so on, in the new mixing up of populations. So that's also something that is taken into account. But perhaps where you can find innovation is certainly in style, because it's true that each time you open up a new novel by either a well-known author or a new one, you are surprised by the search for a new kind of writing, a new style, and innovation is always, always there. It's really always a surprise. Whether it is, Paul Lynch in a Prophet Song, for example, who, the whole novel is only one sentence without any. In McCormack, it's the same, and there's no punctuation. It's inner monologue, etc., and so on. I don't know what you would say about that.
A couple of years ago, there was this very exciting conference at the center in Leuven, where you had actually exactly this focus on experimental style and the dominance of experimentation in contemporary Irish literature. And it is actually something that is still going on, it is still going strong. And at the same time, it is also, I find this fascinating because it's so successful at the same time. We haven't mentioned Sally Rooney yet, but I mean, just I was in Galway when the novel came out, and it was basically everywhere. So it was actually a blockbuster, so to speak, and it is actually such a strong scene, and it contributes to I think also to the willingness to be experimental. I think to also know that it's perceived, it's read, and it is actually seen. I wanted to say that it is a very strong scene. It is a very successful scene, and Sina mentioned that there is actually such a huge amount on secondary material on this hostel life because it is actually thriving. And I eventually mentioned the collaboration between Anne Enright and Jessica Traynor. The most recent novel by Enright is about the impact of poetry on life and on writing. And it is actually about two women, mother and daughter, but it's also the figure of the poet grandfather, and there's poetry in between the chapters. And I assume that Jessica Traynor helped or contributed or collaborated in one sense or another. She just thanks her for at the end. But it's exciting that this is a scene that actually is vibrant and in connection with one another.
I think much of Sally Rooney's success perhaps comes from the fact that she was able to catch, how could I say, what is going on, the main interest of this of the time. I mean, she was really able to translate and preoccupations that are common to a certain generation, not just in Ireland but everywhere else. And it's funny as well because on the one hand, you can say that she's very contemporary and so on, but you do find in her writing some elements which are typical of Irish traditional fiction. And if you take Normal People, for instance, it starts in rural Ireland, and it's all again the narrative of the small town community and the problems that it engenders. And but what she adds to that is, of course, the difference between the social classes, which is something that was completely absent, I guess, from, for instance, McGahern never actually speaks of social classes, or perhaps only marginally. So that I haven't read Intermezzo. I've heard that it's quite good, but I haven't read it yet. There's so much coming out from Ireland that you can't keep up with the pace. I just have a remark for Franca when she started her talk by saying that, well, actually, it's half a crime novel. And from what you said as well, it sounds as if, in fact, a crime novel is never quite actually a crime novel. There's always something else behind, social critique or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think the crime novel is, and some critics have pointed it out, kind of the new the actual realist fiction. It's actually mirroring contemporary society very much. And I think especially in Irish crime fiction, also Northern Irish crime fiction, there's always a very stark political critique and social critique to be found there. Yes.
And why did you choose those two specific novels? Because of the connection between of the boarding schools, is that it?
Yeah, that was kind of the thing that I found interesting, that it comes up like in these two novels, and then in these two novels we have these death of these young men, which is also a parallel, and I found that really fascinating. And in the one case we have a boys' school, and the other a girls' school, where you might think, oh, these must be very different, but then they also have lots of similarities actually, because it's the same class as you mentioned. Yeah, this very privileged class that became rich during the Celtic Tiger years that is portrayed there.
I think genre fiction is a good case in point, and to look at this general argument, because if I'm not completely mistaken, a crime fiction was virtually absent from the Irish literary scene prior to the year 1990, and today it is, I think, the most successful crime scene in Europe. I'm not quite sure there, but it's really thriving. So within the relatively short time span of 35 years, you have a complete reversal. And it's the same thing. It's this notion of innovation, novelty, but also knowledge of tradition. Genre fiction is always referring to certain rules that are then broken, and this is something that I find quite interesting to see, that this happens in such to such an extent in Ireland right now, or still is going strong.
And in this regard, it's interesting to see that a novelist like John Banville, who is, the modernist and who's been praised as innovative modernist, etc., also resorted to the crime fiction genre and turned to a completely different style and became much more realistic. I guess it's because he wanted to speak about Ireland. He wanted to speak about the condition of Ireland, and he found that again the genre of crime fiction was a very adequate vehicle for that.
Yeah, are there any further questions? Yes, please.
It was that for me. Hello, good evening. Thanks so much for to everybody, Ralf, Caroline, for this amazing new issue, and to all the contributors for these brilliant papers. And I guess this is for Jessica, whose paper was one of the several that I had the opportunity to read in detail as part of the copy editing process. And I just wanted to say I was really left gobsmacked by the article. I have known Jessica's work for some time, but this is really something. This is a new level again, and I think of analysis and of like the amount of detail that is unpacked in this paper, and the naturalness with which the intergenerational kind of exchange and influencing between poets of different generations in terms of Northern Irish poetry in the last 30 years, how that's exemplified in that paper is amazing. And I guess part of its exceptionality comes from the fact, or follows from the fact, that you took the time, you took the initiative and the time, and the tour, guided tour by the poet, went to those places that are so important for this poem, that is all about motion through time and space. And I guess maybe that's speaking about 21st century criticism and how we proceed in receiving literature. Maybe that is a way we should or maybe could approach criticism in the future. Really travel to places as much as we can and engage with the authors, if that's possible. Very much so. And my question maybe would relate to the title of the poem and its position in the collection, because it's really there in a very kind of conspicuous position at the end of the book, at the end of a section which consists mostly of elegies, I guess. And the title, you comment on it in the paper, and I think it really deserves another comment. And we mentioned here, because it's a poem in its own right, it's a few words, so it is. And as the title of the last poem, it could be pronounced with a full stop at the end as a kind of a final statement, but yet there is a comma, of course, attached to it. So if you would like to comment on that in any way and the position of the poem in the collection, I would be grateful. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Daniela, for your marvelous and very gracious comments. And also thanks for your editorial suggestions. One of the suggestions that you had made that helped me so much was figuring out how to move my discussion about that title earlier up, because of course it created all these problems to every time I would use the title of the poem, I would have this odd comma hanging there. And so it looked very much like I had some weird grammatical problems in the sentence. And I hadn't explained it quickly enough at the outset that this was not my comma, but this was Stephen's comma. So one of the things that's interesting, and I would only have known this had I spoken to Stephen, not only is the phrase "so it is" so very interesting because it ruptures the boundaries, and this is a poem about rupturing boundaries and through the intergenerational dialogue, but also is that he told me, and also that I found, luckily, because Ciaran Carson was so beloved, I was able in the Irish Times to even find articles where people described it, so I could even quote from it, that one of the final email that Ciaran Carson had sent when he realized that the cancer was going to, you know, there was no way out, was he said, well, so it is, you know, that's, you know, things happen and this is how it is. And so he uses a variation of the same phrasing that then, you know, Stephen drew to my attention about it. And what was interesting is when I was asking him about that phrase, then he was also suggesting that this is in the Irish, particularly the Northern Irish vernacular, you would put it at the end of a sentence. So it is, you know, there you have it. And it's fascinating, as you say very nicely, that it's at the end of the book, but he puts it at the beginning of the you know, it's the title that starts it, and so it's already the motion, already the rupture of movement starts even before we get in there, and so his in some ways appropriation of his mentor's language and his poetics, but he's quite transparent about the homage, even if he's doing things a little differently. But he isn't trying to hide the fact that this connection that since thinking about genre fiction, you can also think about how important the elegy has been in Irish poetry, and what new thing can you do in an elegy. And this is one of the things that Stephen keeps trying to think of, new ways to do elegies, even when it is, and how hard it must be to do an elegy for a poet who, even in his last volume, Still Life, Ciaran Carson did his own self-elegy of the last months of his life. And so how do you do an elegy for an elegist? That is sort of quite a tricky and difficult bar. One thing just to quickly say is, as we see, and I make reference to it in the article, is an earlier poem that he has in here that's an elegy in some regards also for William Butler Yeats, but the way that he invokes him as if, because Yeats, you know, liked to do a little bit of a Ouija board sort of situation, or, you know, of talking with the dead, automatic writing through his wife. And so in this particular thing, we have the Smashing Pumpkins, you know, in the recording sessions, excuse me, then here comes Yeats being brought even into this oddest of contexts. And so I think you see again an example where he reaches backward in time, but brings it into a very contemporary context, and so that idea of just that little comma of rupturing of boundaries and borders, going backwards in time, and then bringing it forward into a new kind of, and packaging it up new, speaks to his larger project. Thank you so much for that wonderful question and for your remarks, Daniela.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Steve.
Looking at you, Seán, now, usually it's roughly an hour, so we...
Yeah. And I was looking at the clock there, and regrettably, because I've enjoyed this session so much, and the introductions to the articles and the discussion that followed, but unfortunately, we're just gone over our time for the session at this point. So if it's okay, Ralf, we might draw things to a close, and allow me to thank you as editor, your co-editor, Carolyn, and all of the contributors to this wonderful issue for your work and your time and the research that you've done in bringing this together. Just to a final note, a couple of things I'll leave you with. One is in the chat there for those of you who want to explore the issue. As I said, there's a slight delay in making it available online, but we hope to have it there by tomorrow. You'll find the link in the chat. You'll also find the email address to contact me if you have any proposals for articles for non-themed issues, or indeed proposals for themed issues, and also the email address to contact Sylvie for review proposals, as well as in the chat. And finally, just to let you know, we have our next an issue that will be following in spring of 2025. We'll have an issue on anthologizing Irish writing from the 19th century to the present, to be edited by Dr. Brian Hammond from the University of Vienna. So something for all of you to look forward to in 2025. And we'll be circulating more information about that issue in due course. So thank you again to everybody who's made this possible today, to the issue, those who contributed to the issue, to Seán for her work behind the scenes, and the editorial board as well. And I hope you all have a wonderful Christmas and have a chance to relax and prepare for what will be hopefully an enjoyable 2025 for us all. So take care and good evening to you all.